Hey guys, Will Martin here. Do we dare to talk about masks? Well, we're going to talk about masks in this video, but we're not going to talk about whether you should wear one or not. We all have our opinions on that. What we're going to talk about is the relative risk or safety versus harm of wearing a melt-blown plastic mask for an extended period of time. It's a question that I've had since very early in the pandemic, when surgical masks or procedure masks, whatever you want to call them, were in very short supply, when we were wearing these masks for hours at a time, 10, 12 hours at a time. And anyone who's worn one of these masks knows that really in a short period of time, the inside of that mask would start to erode. You could visibly see fibers that were loosening. And the question that I had at the time was, are there microscopic fibers that are loosening that you're inhaling and are small enough to probably float unimpeded right down into the deepest reaches of your lung, right to the alveoli? And if you were to get plastics, microplastics into your alveoli, what would that do? Would it cause an inflammatory response? Would it cause eventual fibrosis? We don't know. It hasn't been studied. But I'm going to share with you, originally it was a preprint, and then this journal article was published. It was published in 2020, and it came out of China. So we're going to switch over to it right now. This was from a journal called Environmental Pollution. And the authors, I won't attempt to pronounce their names, but this article was received by the journal in July of 2020, and I believe that's about the time that I found it as a preprint on the internet. Now, these authors are from the Department of Environmental Science and Engineering from the People's Republic of China, and the title of the journal is Need for Assessing the Inhalation of Micro or Nanoplastic Debris Shed from Masks, Respirators, and Homemade Face Coverings during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, at the time of the publication, the authors acknowledged that masks were necessary, as there was no vaccine available. The most common mask in use at the time, and now, for that matter, is the medical face mask or surgical or procedure mask. The mask is a 3-ply construction, 3 layers. An outer layer that's non-woven, a middle layer that is melt-blown plastic, and an inner layer that is also non-woven. All 3 of these layers are polypropylene or something similar, which is a common petroleum-based plastic. They are not cloth, as a lot of people seem to think. Melt-blown plastic is just what it sounds like. It is melted polypropylene that is blown against a form, and when it's cooled, the middle layer is used in the mask for filtration. That middle layer is what's called an electret, meaning that it has a charge to it. It has a dipole charge, which can attract particles, dust, things like that, and hold it inside the mask. No clear evidence that it's going to hold a virus in the inside of the mask. Surgical masks are cheap compared to N95s. They're less than 20% of the cost of an N95 mask, and so they're ubiquitous. We're wearing them today. They're handed out to every visitor that comes in the hospital. If you went into a store somewhere, you were handed one of these. So we've all worn these types of masks. Now, these masks did have to conform to some sort of government standard, and the standard was how well it filtered outside contaminants to protect you. What it didn't do, and what no one has ever really looked into, is whether the mask itself has the ability to shed particles that you would inhale from the inside of the mask. Not much research on that topic, that's for sure. Now, there are studies that you will find quite easily on the effect of micro and nanoplastics on the environment, humans, and wildlife, but not on the inhalation as a result of wearing a mask. Mask studies, again, often looked at the effectiveness of a mask to filter out respirable contaminants from outside the mask. in other words, airborne contaminants, but very little information on the risk of the mask to the wearer. If you look through the literature, you go back to an article from 1986 by Howe, who looked at masks for occupational use that were available back then. Now, these masks, as far as I can tell, these are masks that were probably used by painters, construction people. Probably at one time or another, you might have bought one. I know that I probably still have a few around the house that you bought in order to protect yourself from sawdust, things like that. They were usually relatively firm masks with a rubber strap that you put around your back. These were the masks that were, I believe, studied by Howe in 1986. The study looked at whether those masks shed microfibers, and in fact they did. Howe found significant amounts of respirable microfibers with diameters of less than 3 microns. So these are really small microfibers. Lengths of greater than 5 microns and up to 200 of these per milliliter of air. So in some cases, a lot of contaminants of microfibers on the inside of those masks. Now, it's unclear whether those masks from the 1980s can be compared to today's surgical masks. There's probably been a lot of changes since then. But it does make you wonder, is there a risk inhaling something from these masks? So the authors of this paper took several commercially available top-selling face masks and N95 respirators, put them under a microscope, and they found these things. They found abundant loosely attached debris on the inner face of the mask. Many of them looked like fibers, some looked like particles, and they were all in the micron and submicron range, very, very small. Now, as masks started to be produced in greater quantities and with more urgency, of course, I have a question about quality. Did the quality of the mask begin to suffer? Were they still meeting the same standards that the masks would have met before the pandemic, let's say? And so the question becomes, are they shedding more particulates because maybe they're lower quality? I don't know. There's no way to know that, but again, I think a thinking person would wonder. So the authors of this paper concluded simply further research was needed. But nevertheless, they did say, just by looking under the microscope at masks that were unworn and brand new, that there was loose particulates on the inside of these masks. Now, I just want to share another paper really quickly. This is from the Journal of Hazardous Materials, published in 2021. The authors are from the Chinese Academy of Sciences in Wuhan, China, and the Chinese Research Academy of Environmental Sciences in Beijing. The journal article is entitled COVID-19 Performance Study of Microplastic Inhalation Risk Posed by Wearing Masks. Now, when you read the paper, and I'm going to share all of this, you can please look these up, read them for yourselves, come to your own conclusions, don't take my word for it. But I think what the authors were trying to show was whether masks were protective against the known airborne particulates in urban centers such as Beijing, Shanghai, and even, I believe they studied in Tehran, Iran, where microplastics, micro rubbers are airborne and ubiquitous. What they found after studying these masks was that on the inside of the mask, and they had like what resembled a human inhaling, and I think they put like an adhesive substance across where your nose and mouth would be, and they collected whatever came from the mask to the wearer during an inhalation. What they found was that there was a lot of debris. They postulated that the debris could have come through the mask from the outside, but they couldn't exclude that the debris came from the mask itself. Now, one thing that I found interesting was in the beginning of this article, they said that that middle layer, that melt-blown layer of the surgical mask, should be able to filter particles as small as 1 to 5 microns. What they found on this adhesive that they used to capture loose particulates was that most of those particulates were between 20 and 100 microns. If they were that large, they shouldn't have been able to make it through that middle layer of the surgical mask. As a result, you can, I think, put 2 and 2 together and realize that these particulates came from the inside of the mask itself and not from the outside. But of course, again, the authors did not want to make that conclusion, and so they punted, basically, on that one too. Now, they did reference a couple other papers, and again, I'm going to show this very quickly. There was a paper by Fedari and Akofo published in 2020 from a journal that's called Science of the Total Environment. And the journal article was entitled COVID-19 Face Masks, a Potential Source of Microplastic Fibers in the Environment. So what they're concerned about here are what we're doing with our masks when we're done with them. We wear the mask, we throw it away, it somehow floats off into the environment, into a creek or a river, and how it is essentially contaminating the environment. Now, they note that face masks are made of other substances beyond polypropylene, such as polyurethane, polycarbonate, polyethylene. If you're a chemist, you probably understand the difference between all of these, but I don't think you really want any of those residing in your alveoli. These authors just come out and conclude that nanoplastics and microplastics are present as a result of the deposition of these masks. Getting rid of the mask, throwing them into a trash can, they wind up in a landfill. These microplastics get into the air, whatever. They're sitting in water, whatever the case may be, but they contain toxic chemicals. So these masks contain phthalates, nonylphenols, polybrominated biphenyl esters, triclosan. I don't know what they are, but they sound pretty bad to me. So these folks are just saying that the masks are contaminating the environment. They're hurting the fish. They're hurting the wildlife. My question is, what did they do to the wearer of the mask before the mask was discarded? And again, there's no research done on that. There's no questioning of that. But I think it's reasonable to just wonder, as we wear these masks, is this something that we're going to find out about in 20 years? Is this like the Camp Lejeune thing? Is this like so many other things that we find out 20 or 30 years later were harmful? I think intuitively, you can't wear something like this and just assume that it's completely safe, because I think we know that there's nothing that's completely safe. But I think that this is, again, this is a risk-benefit that has been ignored, especially when there's significant questioning about whether the mask is even effective at preventing influenza or COVID-19 infection to the wearer. So I'd like to know what you think about this. This is something that has been on my mind since day one. I have to wear the mask. I wear it all the time. I think that if you came around my hospital, for the most part, you'd find a lot of wearers have it underneath their chin, except when they're exactly in front of a patient, then they pull it up. So much of this is theater. We know that it doesn't do much good. And we just have to wonder, when is it going to end? When are we going to finally get answers to the questions that we have? So, all right, I don't want to get real controversial about this stuff because it just isn't worth it to me. There's a lot of people online that are doing a great job at that, and I don't want to jump into that fray. I just want to be the guy that has worked in healthcare for a long time, and I've probably got some takeaway points regard to that. I just want to keep it simple. But please tell me what you think about this. Tell me if you've thought about this as well, if you're concerned about it. If you find it interesting, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving it a like, and I will talk to you again on the next video. Thank you.